day 5 of my 5-day challenge to use up 50 different paper scraps. And I've come a long way. I've used up pattern paper scraps, ugly paper scraps, white paper scraps, and I am now left just with the teeny tiny paper scraps. Time is running out and these may end up in the recycling because rules are rules. Rule number 3 says that any scrap left today will go into the recycling no matter how pretty it is. I plan on making around 10 cards today. I do hope this works. It's time to find out. Here's a look at all of the paper scraps that I have left. So today's the day that I need to use each and every one of them. I'm quite nervous about the number of paper strips that I have. A lot of these pieces are not only small, but they're quite skinny. So I am going to have to come up with a plan to use those. There's nowhere near enough paper to make a card base with what I have. So I am going to create 2 using cardstock from my stash. These are 10.5 inches long by 5 3/4 inches wide. Next, I need to create 4 score lines. So I am going to work from the left-hand edge. The first one is at 1 3/4 inches and the second one is at 3.5 inches. I'll rotate the paper 90 degrees and then repeat. So 1 3/4 and then 3.5. Now, if you're lucky enough to have a full size scoreboard, you could score left to right 1 3/4, 3.5, 7 inches and then 8 3/4. But this is how I've done it because I only have a mini one. I now need to add in a couple of cuts. So I've positioned my cardstock into my trimmer at 1.5 inches. And I'll cut between the first score line and the last score line. This is a little bit tricky, so be sure to keep your paper nice and square inside your trimmer. This is an accordion style folded card, so the first fold needs to go away from you and the last fold needs to come towards you. You'll end up with a bit of a Z shape like so. For this next part, you want to actually keep this center part of the card separate from your folds. The top and the bottom parts of the card are just alternating towards you, away from you, towards you, away from you. The center part is the opposite of that. The other way that I've heard this being described is peaks and valleys. So the center part of the card is a peak and then a valley. The outside parts of the card is a peak, a peak, and then a valley. From there, you'll be able to fold the card onto itself and then be sure to burnish the edges really well. I have made 2 of these cards so you can have another quick look at what the folds should look like. This is a bit of a tricky one to describe, but you'll know you have it right when the card will stack on top of itself. It's now time to decorate and you will see why I've gone with this card design. It is perfect for using up lots of smaller paper scraps because the card has sort of sections in it that I can mount in pretty papers. The hardest part at this point was finding papers that would not only fit the square but would also coordinate well together. I'm so glad that at the beginning of the series, I was a little bit mindful of the 50 papers that I started to work with. I'm glad I took the time to find 50 that would work together really well and didn't just choose 50 random pieces of paper. I would 100% recommend doing that if you're going to give this challenge a go. To create a little bit of consistency, I am trying to replicate prints. So for this first card, I did use that deep green print on the front panel and the back panel, and then the mustard bird print in the top and bottom panels, and then I've added a contrasting pattern for this middle section here. I'm going to repeat that print on this back section here as well, and I am actually going to leave these sections plain and just have that cardstock showing through. There's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, I need somewhere to write on my card, so I have a spot for that. But secondly, I just wanted to calm down those prints. I am still working with a bunch of busy prints here, and I just felt like it needed a little bit of empty space on the card to make it feel less busy. I'll show you those cards at the end of the video. I want to get started on card number 3. This one is perfect for all those paper strips that you have, and it's really simple to do. You will first want to work out the card size that you're going to make, so I suggest creating the card base and then making a card front to fit it perfectly. Next, take all of those paper strips that you have that are long and skinny and trim them to 3/4 of an inch wide. You're going to lay them on the card base in what might appear to be a random order, but I want you to pay attention to the balance of the colors in the prints that you're using. Try to use repeating patterns and also pay attention to where the prints join. Think of them a little bit like tiles. You won't want your join marks to line up exactly. You kind of want to stagger them. Trim the ends as you go and continue this process until the card front is fully covered. Now you might find that as you go, there's a strip at the bottom that's too skinny to cover with pattern paper. No problem, just trim it off. You'll also need to adjust your card base. So again, I've just trimmed that little section off. I wanted to add an extra detail to this one, so I have popped it into my sewing machine and stitched around the edge. Here you can see the card bases that I began the video with, so they are all lined ready for embellishments. This next card is inspired by this particular paper scrap. I think it's so pretty and I can't believe I haven't used it yet. I'll mount it onto some cardstock and then add it to this green pattern paper. That one is now ready for embellishments, which I'll show you at the end of the video. This next idea is one of my favorites. I'm going to start by punching out a bunch of squares using my paper punch, and I have chosen patterns that will go together really nicely. You can see here too, the papers on the right, that's all that I have left to use. Maybe, just maybe, I might be able to do this. Okay, so the next thing I want to do with my squares is chop them in half. I'm actually going to make a bunch of triangles. I'll be working on another white piece of scrap from my stash, and I'm going to put together a patchwork quilt. This one, though, is not random at all. This is not like the example that I shared on day 1. This is a very structured geometric quilt. Piece by piece, I'm going to add the triangles to fill out the piece of cardstock. You can see the pattern here that I'm making with the triangles, and of course I'm adding the colors in a random order. I'll show you how that one turns out later in the video. This next card is going to work in a very similar way. I've started with coordinating patterns again. This time though, I'm going to create some squares. These will each be 3/4 of an inch square. I'm going for an ombre design for this card base, so I'm starting with a very light cream coloured pattern paper on the left, and I'm going to transition that through the yellow and the deep mustard and then to the pink. Imagine them as bricks or tiles, and they're going to be stacked one on top of each other. Now there is a little bit of a knack to getting the colours to look like they're going to blend with each other, and that is to actually stagger them. So see how I've got the yellow patch there and there's gaps in between? I'm actually going to fill those gaps with the darker colour. I'm not creating straight rows of colour. I'm actually moving left to right, leaving those gaps in between so that I can blend in the darker colour. The colours do want to blend together, otherwise you'll end up with rows that look more like stripes. If you find this really tricky, what you can also do is just add the colours randomly in a similar way that we did with the triangles. The other big tip I have for you is to map it out first. If you're not sure, don't add your glue until you've trialed and tested the colours and you know exactly what's going to go where. Here's a look at the base. It's now ready for embellishing. And here's a look at what's left. Four paper scraps are left. My biggest concern is this blue floral. I'm not going to call it ugly, but it certainly isn't my favourite. I'm going to draw on one of my all-time favourite hacks for not so pretty paper, and I'm going to cover it with vellum. This piece is from deep in my stash. I want to say Maggie Holmes' open book collection, so several years old now. I will have to do a little bit of trimming here, and I am trying to make this card as large as I can, just given the scraps that I have to use. You could just leave this piece as it is, but I actually want to turn this into a sequin shaker. So I've added stitching around 3 sides, and then this top section I've left open so that I can place the sequins inside. I'll then go back and add stitching along that top edge, and that will seal everything in. I can then add this entire section onto a card base, and it will be ready for embellishing. I've spent the afternoon playing with pretty embellishments and finishing off all the cards, and I want to show you them one by one. Starting with the first 2 cards that I made, I'm actually going to leave these and hold them in my stash as they are. I want the flexibility of being able to adjust the sentiment and some of the icons on these based on the occasion that they're going to be gifted. So if it's a birthday, I think I want to do something like celebrate or even just happy here. And I'm not sure whether I'm going to use them for birthdays or as a thank you card. And the only way to have the flexibility is to just leave them as they are and then add the embellishments once I know exactly who they're going to. For this one, I knew I wanted to create a thank you card. This is the card that had just that one paper strip that inspired its creation. Super simple card, and I really like that about it. I've added some stitching around the edge there, and then a lovely simple thicker sticker. So this is all one piece. It's just a sticker that I've placed, and then I fussy cut out the butterflies. Isn't that pretty? I love the shine on this one. So lovely. You did not see me make this one. This one worked in a similar way to this one here, in that I had this one strip of pattern paper that I wanted to use, and I've just layered some embellishments on top. Super simple card. I made sure too for this one not to add any stitching. I know that you don't always have access to a sewing machine or have the time to create the stitches on a card. So this one is very simple, no stitching, came together in probably about 10 minutes. I want to show you this one next. I love how this turned out. This is the one with that very busy pattern paper in the background that I turned into a shaker pocket. The one thing I would change here though is I would have maybe used darker sequins. These are white and they are very subtle. You can see them probably a little bit better in person than on camera here, but I think maybe a darker blue might have been a better way to go. This card is all about the shine. I love these stamped images. So these are being stamped and then die cut and embossed with a gold embossing powder. This is just another little paper scrap that I had, some alphabets and a fussy cut butterfly. This one is going out to a special friend as a random hello. And yeah, I think it's really cute. I think it turned out really cute, especially given that I wasn't that big of a fan of that pattern paper to start with. I've left these ones till last because they've all worked on a very similar idea. So these are the ones where we've patched together paper strips. So this was the rectangular one. So there's strips of the rectangular paper scraps that have been staggered a little bit like tiles or bricks on a wall. I've then added just a simple tag, some puffy stickers, and then a sentiment. This one says so thankful, and a bow. I'm all about them bows. I think the stitching adds a really lovely detail to this card as well. I love that. Next up we have our squares. So these are 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch, and this is the one that was the ombre sort of look to it. So starting with the light tones, going through yellow and then to pink. And I have kept this very simple. Card is open this way for this one. And I've just added a rectangle panel on this end and added a sentiment. You're the best. Kiss, hug, kiss, hug. I really like the simplicity of this. I think by keeping the embellishment simple, the background stands out. And I really like this look. I actually want to try this idea on a scrapbook page. I think it would look really, really dramatic. If you're not feeling confident about the ombre print, this is what it would look like if you just applied the tiles randomly. So I did want to show you how that would look, and I really love the look of this one too. I have probably embellished it a little bit heavier than this one, but that's just how it turned out. I do like the thicker title, the fussy cut butterfly, and this one would have made a very sweet Valentine's Day card. I have 2 more cards to share with you, and then I can show you what paper scraps are left. These are the ones that I did with the triangles. So very geometric design, very balanced and linear. I've made sure that everything lines up nice and straight. And I've gone with a centered sentiment. This one says hello, hooray. And I thought it might be fun to send for when I hear good news, maybe even a birthday, but I wanted to keep it pretty generic and pretty general so that I've got options. I do love to have these kind of cards on hand, ready to send when I hear good news. This is the second one, so I've done it a little bit differently, off-centered the sentiment and the embellishing, just to see what that would look like, and love that too. This is quite dimensional, this one. This one ended up being quite dimensional, so this might have to go along with some fresh flowers and a visit. I do love the scale of these ones. I love how big they are, and I can really imagine this idea on a scrapbook layout as well. So I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind too. I was really surprised at just how many paper scraps I was able to get onto these cards, and I love how they turned out, especially these ones. I think these ideas of a paper piercing are real winners. So here's what's left. 15 tiny pieces. Most of these are tab elements that really could be added onto any paper craft project. Proof that every paper scrap has potential. Rules are rules, and I knew this day would come. Their fate was decided until I found this. Even more paper scraps, and that's when I decided to just add them to these. Looks like I am going to have to do another paper scraps stash busting challenge because no scrap should be left behind. They really are like weeds in the garden, impossible to get rid of.